Good morning, everyone. We'll get ready in another minute or so, waiting for some more folks to join.
Yeah. Camilla, you can see the chat. The chats.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the fourth session of Corporation for Supportive Housings and Enterprises training series, Housing as a Pathway to Justice. We are so glad to have you with us. This session is titled Gaining Project Buy-in, which will cover strategies for building relationships with community partners and driving support for new housing developments that serve people impacted by the criminal legal system. Today, we are fortunate enough to have our speaker and partner who will guide this presentation, Andre Ward, Associate Vice President of David Rothenberg's Center for Public Policy from the Fortune Society. Before I pass it off to Andre, I want to note that we will have a Q&A session at the end, along with some interactive quizzes throughout the presentation. We'll also share the recording with those that have registered. And also, please be sure to register for our next session on January 17th. Looking forward to seeing you there. And with that, I'll now pass it to you, Andre.
Yes, good morning, and thank you so much, Emma, for that. And on behalf of our CEO, Joanne Page, our Deputy CEO, Stanley Richards, and Executive Vice President, Rob DeLeon, and all of the Fortune staff, we're really grateful for this opportunity to be able to present with our partners from Corporation for Supportive Housing and Enterprise to talk about this really important issue and to spend some time with you. And so the Fortune Society has been around for over 55 years, offering reentry and advocacy services to people who have been impacted by the criminal legal system. And as a part of that work, we had offered emergency, transitional, and permanent affordable housing to people who've been impacted by the criminal system for over 20 years. And since our founding, we provided housings for thousands of formerly incarcerated people. In fact, in fiscal year 2021, we provided low threshold access to emergency, transitional, or permanent housing support to about 471 people or so. And just to briefly describe some of our housing models, right? Our residences include what is called the Fortune Academy, which is we affectionately refer to as the castle, because essentially that's what it looks like. And it's a 93-unit emergency and transitional supportive housing residence in West Harlem, and it opened in 2002 for homeless justice impacted people. And then we have what is called Castle Gardens, and Castle Gardens had opened in 2010, and it provides about 63 units of permanent supportive housing for homeless justice involved people and 50 permanent affordable units for low-income community members. And then we have what is called the Mandela community, like Nelson Mandela, but also it has another in-depth interpretation of that name. And it opened in 2022, and it's a supportive housing residence for homeless seniors in the Bronx. And we provide 57 housing units for our target population. And we had two residences in development. One is called Castle 3. It's an 82-unit affordable and supportive housing building in East Harlem, and it's expected to open in 2024. We're really excited about that. And it's modeled after our Castle Gardens. And then the second development is Castle 4, an Upper West Side building, which is formerly an illegal hotel that we will convert to around 84 units of affordable housing. 59 units for formerly incarcerated individuals exiting from New York City shelters, and 24 units of affordable housing for community members. And lastly, the Fortune Society also operates 239 plus unit scattered site housing, including 60 units of justice involved supporting housing, or what we refer to as JISH, via a recent expansion of our city-funded emergency and transitional housing contract from 100 to 250 beds. We also provide our most vulnerable participants with safe, supportive housing while they access our stabilizing services. So that's just an overview of some of the housing that we have as a portfolio, and we will go ahead and move forward in this presentation. So thank you. And now you'll see this piece by our lovely and powerful and fearless leader, Joanne Page, several years ago. In fact, this is in 2010. And we know that our CEO arguably is one of these most staunch advocates for offering housing to people with conviction histories. And here she's offering a presentation at the Garrison Institute. So let's check her out.
What we've been talking a lot about today is how we change the behavior of people in buildings. And what I want to talk about for a couple of minutes is how we've used a building to change behavior. Okay, what we had was the need to have people make a fundamental change in a deeply learned behavior, sometimes a multi-generational behavior, right away. Fortune Society serves about 3,000 people a year, most of them just out of prison, some of them as an alternative to incarceration. And we own a building called the Castle at 140th Street and Riverside in Harlem, which houses about 100 people a year, 60 at a time, with some turnover. What we needed to do to fit the gap in services that we were experiencing was house people regardless of whether or not they had violent convictions. But we needed to do it in a safe way. We're in a residential community, so we need to do it for our neighbors. But we also need to do it for ourselves because the kind of change that we wanted to see doesn't happen when people are afraid. So we needed to guarantee people's physical safety and then work hard at emotional safety, which is a lot harder to guarantee. So this is the context, right? We work with people who come from a culture of violence. Most of them were victims of child abuse. Most of them grew up in juvenile institutions with violence. Many of them grew up in foster care with violence. They've all come out of jails and prisons where violence is a survival strategy. You're basically, as one of our guys said, you're the predator or the prey. Far, far better to be the predator. So what we're doing is speaking to people who come out of a system that is the antithesis of pretty much everything we value. I taught some classes in a prison in Delaware for a while. And what they did was they would give people an ID tag that they'd be penalized for not wearing. And the ID tag had a picture of them, but it was a picture of them when they got arrested. And as one guy who wore it backward, despite the risk of penalty, said, "This is a picture of me at the worst moment in my life. I'm not willing to wear it around my neck." So what prisons do is they look at people as the worst thing they ever did and treat them accordingly. And what I've learned about the human race is that people live up to the expectations or down to the expectations that you have of them most of the time. Not all the time. People break out if you have negative expectations. They sometimes do some marvelous things. And people break out if you have positive expectations. They sometimes do some truly rotten things. But the question we had is, how do we bring people into our house when they've had a survival skill that's kept them alive, and they can't use that skill in our house because it'll jeopardize the space and everybody in it? So what we needed was a culture strong enough that when somebody walked in out of prison or out of one of the violence-ridden large city shelters that New York City chooses to invest in, what we needed was somebody to stop for a minute and realize this was different, and then hold still long enough to figure out what was different and not respond in the way that they were used to responding. And it was in the nature of an experiment, because most of the people we knew who did supportive housing wouldn't take people with long violent histories. And those were the people we had the hardest time placing. So we've put an enormous amount of energy into building a culture, because we need a culture powerful enough that it grabs people as they walk in. So here's what it takes in our experience, and we opened the place in 2002. I think we run one of the safest buildings in New York City, and we have people with pretty awful records in the mix. The first thing, I think, is about who our staff is. Most of our staff are people who've done time themselves. So immediately, somebody walks in our door, and they see somebody they know. They might have done time with them. It might have been the person who was the biggest problem in the neighborhood, the one the kids were told not to be like. And that person is there and is a role model. The next thing that happens when a person walks in is that we got about 60 people living there, mostly men, some women. And they're going to see people they did time with. So they're going to look to them for some modeling. The next thing we do is we talk to people, right? We tell them what the rules of the house are. And we offer them something really beautiful. It's a castle, right? It's a river view. It's a lovely, lovely building. And we say, you can live here. And people are coming from sleeping under a bridge, or they're coming from living in a large city shelter, or they're coming from Rikers Island, or they're coming from Greenhaven Prison. And it's like, I can live here? And the answer is, yeah, you can. But we need something from you. We have an absolute rule of no violence, no threat of violence. Break that rule, we'll still love you, we'll still work with you, but you can't live here. So it makes people stop for a minute. And we work very hard at building the culture. One of the things we do is we do a community meeting every Thursday night. I'm usually the one who runs it. If not, it's somebody else from the executive team. And it's a conversation that's meant to build the culture of the house. It's about what it takes to make the transition from one world to another, what it takes to handle conflict in a different way. And it's a lot of role modeling, because since we house people who turn over, since 100 people move through our house in about a year, the person who starts is always talking to people who are a couple of steps ahead of them, and they see them making those struggles, and we get to talk about them. So we started in 2002. It's about 8 years in. We've had about 700 people come through our house. I think I can count the instances of violence on the fingers of my hands. And violence mostly is somebody pushing somebody. We haven't had a serious incident in the house, and we've had people with horrific records. So it is possible to have a culture so powerful that somebody walking in with survival skills that mean you respond to conflict with violence realizes, I got to do something different, without knowing what the different is and holding still long enough to figure it out, with role modeling all around. And it's a fascinating thing to see. It's actually really moving. And I welcome people to come visit. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's our CEO, Joanne Page, giving a presentation that obviously laid out our approach to providing housing for people with criminal backgrounds in that way. And so you just got an idea of that. And that was in 2010. We served 3,000 people at the time. Now in 2022, we serve maybe over 9,000 people. So as you can see, right, things have not lessened in terms of the criminal system and how it functions and works. There's more of a need and demand now for housing than ever. And we at the Fortune Society are grateful to be able to provide housing to people, in addition to offering technical support to other organizations in different states to replicate our housing model, because it's a need nationally. Next. Questions? So you notice, right, there's a question here, and you can choose some of the box, whatever you feel from either the selections, and submit.
Okay, I think we have given folks just a minute more to respond, and then I'll share the results that we're seeing.
Great.
Okay. So we see here a lot of you believe that a good neighborhood is a good neighbor is an organization that commits to making a neighborhood stronger. But all the other responses are also kind of equal. Acts with transparency, listens to community needs, and meets and accommodates to those needs whenever possible. Okay.
So I think we have a clear sense, Camilla, of people's understanding, right, of the importance of what it means to be a good neighbor.
Yes.
And the Fortune Society, had went through those experiences and still is going through those experiences as we develop and build out new housing models for our folks. And so one of the things to think about in being a good neighbor to the community in which you seek to be located, that means, again, being honest and straightforward about your organization's mission. One of the things that our CEO did, and working also with executive leadership, Deputy CEO Stan Richards, and other members of our staff who were actually some whom were residents in the community, they were straightforward with the community. They didn't blindside them. They didn't do things behind the scenes in a stealthy kind of way. They were very transparent. They were looking to build housing here in the community. And our mission is to work with people who have been impacted by the criminal legal system and have criminal conviction history. And we want you to know that. And we welcome your feedback. And we acted with transparency about, our operations and plans, as Joanne spoke about in the video. And obviously, bringing a model like that into the community at that time raised a tremendous amount of concern. NIMBYism rose its ugly head, right, out of my backyard. But again, through being honest and straightforward about our mission, acting with transparency about our operations and plans, our CEO and others, we have a breakthrough. We listened to the needs of and concerns of the community. We didn't trivialize their concerns. We were able to allay some of their fears by just being very specific about our operations and plans and being transparent and open to their feedback. And then seeing how we can meet and accommodate the needs whenever possible. As we know, at some point we were looking to build out Castle Gardens, where we mixed affordable and permanent housing comprised of people with conviction histories and those who were not, but were from the community. Seeing how that can be blended into our housing model. And ultimately that came about in 2010. And then we committed to making the neighborhood safer and stronger. And over time, what we found is that the community embraced us. And now we are a staple in the community after all of those years, in a place where there was tremendous resistance at one point. Now, in fact, we do a series of things. We have Halloween parties, where at one time, people didn't want to go near that area because they deemed it to be a scary area to be in. But now we host Halloween parties for children in the community. Community board meetings are held at our housing site. We offer fresh produce to our communities. We host other block party events for our communities where they can also access resources and services from other providers. So we have become a part of that community in a way now that clearly demonstrates us being a good neighbor. Next. So what does community engagement mean to you? We'll take the time to field any responses or questions really about that, or just responses. What does it mean, right? What does community engagement mean to you? And reflect on that for a little bit, and then we will show you an example of what that looks like in action in some way.
All right, for folks that want to participate, you can write out menti.com, where the link is up here, and you can put in the code, or you can just click on the link that I put in the chat.
Put your comment in the chat. And then we'll show you an example of it's a really unique model that's happening in another state in the country. And we'll show that to you in a moment.
All right, so we're getting some good responses here. So mental health services, inviting, listening, collaboration, being present. Again, listening to the community, providing resources, respect, and empowering. Change. That's a good one.
Yeah.
All right. So
Collaborate.
with collaboration, yeah. Okay. And with that, like, thank you everyone for participating. And with that, like Andrea said, we're now going to show you another video of what that looks in the ground.
I have over 100 letters on my desk right now of people in desperation asking for housing because coming home to Alameda County, you know, there's already just a housing crisis in general. But for someone that's coming home, the selections are much more scarce. The Homecoming Project is what some would say is absolutely ludicrous, but it's brilliant.
It was very stressful. A lot of my friends that were on the outside was trying to, you know, run around and find different places for me too, while I did my work on the inside. My big thing was housing and not knowing where I was gonna go or would I be comfortable.
People have homes that have extra rooms in the community, but they're not being used for one reason or another. And we thought, what would it look like if these individuals would bring in somebody that's coming home from prison and we would pay for them to be housed in that home?
You know, and don't get me wrong, I mean, I was excited about the prospect of coming home, but there was this agitation and fear, you know, like, well, you come in as a kid, and now you're going out there as a man, and you came in with little responsibility, and now you're getting out there and you gotta be independent.
My whole thing was fearing not being comfortable somewhere or the fear of where I was gonna go. And being trans, getting out of prison and having some place to be for 6 months while doing the other things that I needed to do, that's huge. And for me, it's part of the reason why I've been as successful as I am this past year, is having that stable housing.
The Homecoming Project started as a housing project with a simple idea that people getting out of prison, we knew that it had been for a long time, lacked the resources and relationships they needed to be able to have a fair start after their incarceration. And so we said, what could we do that's different than building a new building or having to take up a bed in a shelter or transitional housing system? And so we looked to Airbnb and the sharing economy for that answer, and that's what sort of piloted this idea.
adjustment is big and huge for someone that has been incarcerated 10 plus years. So much has changed in our society in 10 years that you can imagine what curves there are just with technology and the internet and how to even book a doctor's appointment. These aren't things that you learn in a transitional housing program, whereas in the Homecoming Project, you're working closely with a community navigator who knows firsthand through lived experience what it's like to transition and who to get connected to in what time frame so that you're staying on this smooth process of reintegrating.
For the ones that are coming out, I hope that they understand that they have been forgiven. They have another opportunity, and having another opportunity, that's a great start.
Man, I believe in helping. And I want to be right here to help them through that problem or whatever they're going through. I want to be right here for them. To let them know, oh, you don't have to worry about that. We can handle that. That's nothing, you know what I mean?
We're not just giving people a room, we're creating relationships. Relationships between the homeowner and the people in the home and the participants. And time again, it is what we hear from everybody involved in these relationships, that it is that relationship which is so powerful.
Since my release, I've been working at a homeless shelter, and that further opened my eyes to the need for housing. Failure was not an option for me. It wasn't. My body may have been incarcerated, but my mind never was.
So that's the Homecoming Project. It's a really powerful model. And, some of the things, the highlights from it, obviously, they've mentioned that securing housing leads to immediate stability. And we know that. And this is why we're all here and doing that kind of work that we're doing. Because, 10 times, people that obviously are formerly incarcerated are 10 times more likely to experience homelessness if they don't have stable housing. So leveraging available living spaces to support people entering communities is important. This Homecoming Project is a classic example of that. Here in New York City alone, over 50% of the people that are released from New York State prisons are entering into New York City shelters. And some would rather not be in New York City shelters because of the conditions there, and the default becomes prison. So people would rather go back inside prison than to be in shelters. And which perpetuates the vicious cycle of reincarceration, etc. So this is an example, the Homecoming Project, and it's a really interesting model. Next slide. So we have another question for you. Sure. And while we're waiting, one of the things to note here in New York City is that in addition to ensuring that there is emergency, transitional, and permanent affordable housing for people with conviction histories, right? There also has to be legislation kind of wed to that to ensure that people are not discriminated against when accessing housing. And in New York City, there's a coalition working to advance legislation to prevent housing discrimination for people with conviction histories. It's called the Fair Chance Housing Act. And we currently have about 30 sponsors for the bill, 4 borough presidents and comptroller and public advocate. And people are realizing more and more the need for this important legislation to pass. And so in Seattle, legislation has been passed. It's similar to the Fair Chance for Housing Act. So there's proof of concept there, and we believe in the effects of this legislation and how it will change the lives of thousands of New Yorkers. In fact, 750,000 New Yorkers have conviction histories. I know it varies from state to state, but 750,000 people here in New York City have conviction histories, 80% of whom are Black and Latinx. And so this is also a racial justice issue, and we are looking to move that along. So now we're at the question, how do you generate opportunities for the community? That's the next question. You can put your responses in the chat. And thank you, Camilla, for putting up for us. How do you generate opportunity? Take a few moments for folks to answer. Exploring the community.
All right. So we're seeing some answers come in. Collaboration, meeting people where they are, exploring the community, organizing holiday events, blog parties, giving them a chance to be involved and invested in the work that's being done. Volunteering work, all great examples.
Yes, Camilla, and they put in the chat, some people put listen, and you put it in bold, listen, right? Because that's the major thing. People want to be heard sometimes, and sometimes people are not heard in the community, and it creates resistance because they're unaware. And that's why education is important too, and like generating opportunities. And one of our colleagues from Corporation for Supportive Housing, Lauren, is suspending judgment and stopping ourselves from trying to anticipate or guess what an outcome will be, helps generate opportunity. And that ties into education, right? When people are educated, it creates the opportunities to embrace things that they may not have once been familiar with. So then obviously what follows is the collaborations, meeting people where they are in the holiday events, and finding out more of what is needed, because dialogue is happening based on communicating with each other. So those are examples of generating opportunities. And the more we as housing providers can demonstrate that our housing models can be a benefit to the community, the greater the degree of openness for the community to embrace us. So hiring from within the zip code, right? We look to identify community residents that can be liaisons between you and the community. I know we have our Vice President of Risk Management and our Policy Council is also on this call, Ben Mesh and Emily Shapiro, each of my colleagues in the Fortune Society who are doing this work for a long time. And one of the things we find important is ensuring that we're working with people from the community that could serve as liaisons between our organization and the community. And that was a part of the work too that our CEO had done in partnership with some of the staff at Fortune, was to identify some community residents, and some of whom had also been staff at the Fortune Society. And they would serve as liaison between us and the community, because when it was time to meet with members of the community boards, etc., we can say that we have people that are directly from the community that are also a part of this work, and that obviously are reputable and can be respected. And so, do you guys hear me? Am I a little low? Do you hear me better now?
It's better, yeah.
All right, perfect. I'll try to project my voice a little bit more. But that's what we found that was important, that we would obviously have people that were from the community that would also be representatives of the organization, but also serve as liaisons between us and the community. And as we said, right, we identified folk who were trusted pillars in the community. So whether they were part of community boards, whether they were representatives in different ways, we identified someone or people who were trusted in the community, and they in turn partnered with us to communicate what we were looking to do. And that made it a bit easier for us to move forward with our project. And then we identify credible messengers, right, who have direct experience with successful reentry into the community. As our CEO talked about in the video that you looked at, we hire people who are directly impacted. In fact, the Fortune Society, over 50% of our staff have been directly impacted by the criminal legal system. 30% of our executive leadership is also directly impacted, and a percentage of our board members are directly impacted. So the credible messenger work is important, especially in establishing housing in a community. And so the direct experiences of people, being able to relate to people. Some people say when you can relate to people, you're related in some instances. And so having people on the ground that have the experiences that directly are related to others creates relationships in a way that fosters community and allows for community to grow. Next slide. Prioritizing resources and programs for residents and community members, right? And so, at Fortune, we use multiple funding sources to create opportunities. And so one, to access what communities presence needs are. And we do that, right, by obviously speaking with our community members and our residents, right, to find out what their needs are, and they inform that. So it's not like Fortune just driving exactly how things should be, but it's participatory and partnership oriented in our assessment of what communities' present needs are. We join on other providers, right, to learn about how to access services for our residents and communities. And while the Fortune Society does offer a suite of different services for which we offer to people to wrap around them so they don't necessarily have to run around New York City to access services, and everything will be right there for them to assess. There are service providers that may have things that we may not offer, and we will join with those providers, right, to learn about how to access services for our residents in different ways. And then we establish employment and training programs for community residents. We have a really robust employment and education services at the Fortune Society at our main service center in Long Island City. And we refer participants there who are residents, but also community members who have loved ones who have been impacted by the criminal legal system. We will refer them to our services so they can access it. I think that's one way of prioritizing resources and programs for residents and community members to demonstrate that our housing and the work that we do is valuable, not just to the people that we serve with conviction histories, but the community generally speaking. Many of whom, in terms of its members, have loved ones who have conviction histories and need supporting services. And then we make services more flexible, right? We allow for residents and non-residents to access services, as I kind of mentioned really briefly, because again, it fits really well in our goal of integrating ourselves fully into the community and becoming one with it, so as to move forward in creating opportunities for all. Next slide. So maximizing opportunities to engage space. And so we list some of the places where community members congregate, right, and are more likely to create an opportunity to engage members about a project, right? We will consult and go to polling sites, right, and community board meetings, block parties, food distribution sites, holiday parties, right? All of these places are where community members frequent. And when we are looking to develop a project in some way, right, we will go to these specific areas, right, to engage and interface with many of the people there so that they will become more familiar with who we are. So that's an example of places to which you can go to maximize opportunity to engage a space. Questions? What spaces has your organization found most effective in engaging community members?
All right, so we're seeing a lot of the folks here using community board meetings as the primary venue to engage community members.
Yeah, which is not surprising, right? It's a lot of where the decision making is happening, and where some of those of influence are, and where you can obviously move things along in a way that is heard a lot more so. So it's not surprising that 80% of you chose community board meetings. So summary of generating opportunities, right? We have heard from our CEO who started this off about our work at Fortune, and we have laid out to you just some of the ways in which you can generate opportunities. And we thank our partners, Enterprise and Corporation for Supportive Housing, for the work that they do, because with their support, right, it furthers our capacity to be able to generate opportunities to develop housing models and housing for people who have conviction histories, whether it be emergency, transitional housing, or permanent affordable housing. So I don't know if folks have any questions. Maybe they want to put in the chat, or my colleagues, Camilla or Emma. Others have any thoughts or ideas. But this is the work. And when looking to establish housing that serves justice involved folk, you want to make sure that you're generating the kind of opportunities to, one, be able to establish said housing, but two, making sure your housing is robust enough to offer the support that the people who will be living there need.
Thank you, Andrew. And yeah, with that, we will open it up to questions from the audience. So feel free to put those questions in the chat, or if folks are comfortable, you can also unmute yourself and ask the question directly.
Or if you have a thought that you'd like to share, right? That may not be in the form of a question, we welcome that too. You don't all speak up at once.
I actually have a question for you, Andre. When we think about community engagement, do you think it should be implemented like in phases? Phases being like, I don't know, the level of, I don't know, the intensity by which you're like engaging with the community, or should it only happen at the beginning of a project? So I don't know if that question made sense. So is it an ongoing thing, or does it only happen in the beginning of a project when you're developing it?
And we have our Vice President of Risk Management on too that can obviously provide an answer, but it's an ongoing process. It's not a one and done, right? Because the goal is to continue to engage our community into perpetuity. As long as we are residents in the community, as long as we are offering housing within the community, it's critically important that we continue to remain engaged. And that's why Camilla and others, we offer the kind of supports in the community that we do. Like we offer fresh produce, we hold these different kind of engagements, block parties, we allow for community board meetings to be held within the building, right? And we are seen as a resource in the community in that way, because it's a partnership. Right? We are in the community because we are the community. And therefore it's important, right? It's not, a phase necessarily where, we speak with them, we get our housing established, and then see you later, right? It's really just being consistently engaged and accessible, because that's the other part. Accessibility is important, right? To let the community know that we're still here. And at Fortune, because we have the permanent affordable housing that's comprised of both people that have justice involvement and those who don't, it fosters even more of a sense of community where we're always engaging folks.
Thank you, Andrew.
Sure. And what states do we have? People from different states are on this call, Camila and others? Do we have some folks from different states? Okay, New York.
New York.
All right.
I think in the past we've gotten some folks from like Jersey,
Okay.
gotten a couple other places.
Thank you, Lauren. Now, this was curious to know. I know that, this work is so needed, right? And it obviously has national implications. Hi, I have a question. How do you walk the line of being honest with the community about who you are? And it's a good question, Carrie, if that's the correct pronunciation of your name. Our CEO mentioned that right at the beginning, right? We go to the community, we let people know exactly what we're doing. We work with people, many of whom have violent convictions. Some may be deemed heinous ways, and we work with them. We have a zero tolerance for people causing harm or being violent in any way against themselves or others. We set that criteria. And in our transparency, we are able to get past people's fears, because that's the other part of it. Like, people are concerned about, will harm come to them if people with conviction histories are residents or tenants, and we allay their fears, assuage their concerns by just being open. This is exactly who we're serving. It's exactly what we do, and we welcome any questions that you have. And one of the things that our CEO had done is given people her direct number. Like, here's my number, and not some voicemail or some email that you. Here's my direct number. That at any time you have a concern, you call me. And she did it. Our deputy CEO Stanley Richards did it, and several others who were involved, right, supported in some way. But they were deeply committed to making sure that people had access to them, so that there was no room for people to have concerns without those concerns being addressed. So thank you for that question. I hope it answered it, Carrie, in some way.
Yeah. If I could just add to that a little bit too, so you're just coming in. I think that I really appreciate, Carrie, your dedication to your client's privacy. That's super important. And I also think you can talk about kind of like what you do and who you serve in a way that is like really transparent and gets at, why you're serving these folks, why there's a need, what the benefit is, without any sort of without going into like grave detail about what folks are going through, right? So like, I think it's okay to talk about the population that you're serving and the things that they might encounter, or barriers that might come up for them and why, without disclosing like specific diagnoses or anything like that. Like, I don't know if that helps or was necessary.
Oh, no, Lauren, you're totally right. And we don't disclose specifics around people's diagnoses or cases for that matter, right? We simply say who we serve. Some people have violent felony offenses. Some people have done some harm in the community in a real way that's been impactful. But we work with people and assess them for their potential to be good tenants. And in doing so, right, we have our policy. So irrespective of their diagnoses or their conviction, our criteria, right, will hold people to a standard of behavior that will be modeled in the community, right, based on their engagement with us. So that's a great question. Thank you for that. And thank you, Lauren, for adding. We appreciate that. Any other questions or comments even?
I have another question. We've seen some of our development partners actually in their underwriting of a project include community engagement as being a budget line. But what are some of the ways that you guys structured, like to have a staff person be leading that community engagement? Do you do it by project, or have you reached like a level of scale of economies by having that person touch on different projects across the portfolio?
Well, I know, and I don't know if Ben is still on with us. Ben, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Well, I would say this, we still prefer the model of using someone or engaging with someone who lives in the community on a per project basis. We do have community engagement. And the way we do it is it's spread across our development team. So it's pretty much an expectation for everyone on our development team, housing development team, to be engaged with the community in the process. I just wanted to bring up one point. A lot of what we have to do in terms of developing these projects is deal with myths about this population. And it's a constant conversation. I think a lot of it involves really education as well, that people understand that, you know, the visceral response to a project like this coming to a community is like somehow we are going to increase crime, or it's going to become unsafe, or land values are going to decrease. All of those are myths. They don't exist. And we can show that both through studies that have been done, but also through the way we operate our buildings. And I think one of the things Andre touched upon is what we do is we bring community members to our existing buildings and let them see where we are looking to develop. We ask them to come look at what we've developed prior. That'll tell you what we do and how we engage with the community. And community engagement's an everyday process. And one of the other things I would suggest, if you're getting into the development business, one of the greatest skills we have is that we listen to the community, but not only listen about, you know, what their concerns are, but what do they want to see in a building. We have made technical changes to our buildings to reflect what the community wants. There, in one situation, they didn't want a very tall building. They wanted a shorter building. They felt like that would change the way the community looked, was if the building didn't fit in with the way things are presently in the community. Are we going to provide community space? In our new building, Castle 3, which we are constructing in East Harlem, we put in a teaching kitchen because the community wanted to have that kind of service available, that we can bring in people, teach nutrition, teach proper cooking. So the more you listen to the community, the more you show that you're engaged, the better the success of the building is going to be. And it's a hard thing to do because you have your own ideas of what this building should look like or what you think we should be doing. But if you fail to incorporate the community's needs and desires and what they're looking for, the project's going to fail. And I'm so appreciative of Andre and talking about all the things that we look at to do to make these projects successful. And, you know, and we appreciate very much Enterprise, who's been a very big supporter of our housing projects. And we couldn't do it without them and what they do for us every day.
Thank you, Van.
Ben is typically quiet behind the scenes, but as you see, you're, you know, Ben just has a wealth of knowledge and having been deeply immersed in a lot of the more nuanced work of our housing development. So thanks, Ben. That's all.
All right. So I'm not seeing any other questions come in, but I did want to share our next session, which is going to go more in depth about NIMBYism, and we'll be inviting some other developers also to talk about like their own engagement and how they deal with those situations. So that next session is January 17th. And for those that are interested, feel free to sign up for our next session. And again, I want to say thank you so much to Andre and Lauren and Ben here for being engaged in this presentation. And thank you everyone for coming. And I'll also be sharing just really quickly before everyone leaves our survey. Well, feedback survey for this session. Your feedback is super important. So we do want to make sure that we integrate it in our future sessions. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy this.
And thank you, Emma, as well, for obviously being involved in this. And we would be remiss if we didn't thank Camilla for leading these efforts. We appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for being our partner. This was fantastic. Loved all the videos too. It's always so great to hear from Joanne.
Yeah.
Take care. Thanks, Andre. You're awesome. We'll talk soon, everybody. See you in January.
Right. You well, everyone.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Likewise.